following clip has been taken from our 2024 Australian Army Flying Museum video with presenter Scott Downs. Follow the link in the description for the full tour.
So at the same time as the Army Light Aircraft Squadron is being formed, within Defence there is a need to start looking at the air mobility capability within Army, simply because we are becoming more and more engaged in Southeast Asia. The Air Force are tasked to send effectively a secret delegation to America to start looking into air mobile operations. And obviously at this point, the UH-1 or the HU-1 is being employed by the US Army. Now, sometime in the 50s, the US Army and Air Force had decided that all helicopter and sort of ground-based aviation would be Army aviation, and anything to do with the sky was going to be Air Force. We haven't made that delineation yet within Australia at this point. So the Air Force are sent, they look into it. The Air Force were not particularly interested in doing helicopter operations, but they were tasked to do this because Australia needed to do it. In the end, we made our first buy of UH-1B, so the Bravo model of the Huey. We made that very early on. By 1962, we're starting the process of buying the aircraft, and they are full-time employed by about 1964-65. At that point, Australia gets more and more heavily involved in Vietnam. We've already got the training team in Vietnam. But by 1964-65, we are in lockstep with the Americans, and we're going to get ourselves enmeshed in the Vietnam conflict by about 1965. So by that point, we have an air mobile capability using the B model. By 66, 67, the Americans realised the B model isn't the aircraft it could be. They extend the fuselage, create the D model, Iroquois, which then is developed into the H model, so a few more radios and so forth. And that becomes the iconic aircraft that is in every single Vietnam War movie that you've ever seen. It's the H model Huey. And that's what is the aircraft behind me. Now, I need you just to use a bit of imagination, please, and remove all these guns, okay? And look at the aircraft without the guns on it. And in that format, we call it a slick with no offensive armament on it. We call it a slick. And that is the tactical transport helicopter. And the combat power in a tactical transport helicopter is not the guns, it's this. It's the big empty space inside and what it can carry. So it can carry fuel, it can carry water, it can carry ammunition, it can carry barbed wire and star pickets, but most importantly, it can carry self-loading freight. And what is self-loading freight? Infantry. It'll carry infantry soldiers, and in this format, the aircraft can carry up to 9 fully equipped infantry soldiers, depending on conditions and fuel, but up to 9 fully equipped infantry soldiers, 2 pilots and 2 door gunners. The big thing there, though, is the aircraft is moving at 3,000 metres a minute. So within a few months of all this kicking off in Vietnam, people started to realise very quickly that at 3,000 metres a minute, we're starting to outrun the fire support for those infantry soldiers, the artillery back at their base, the mortars and artillery back at their base. So we're starting to outrun that. We're getting outside that fire support envelope very quickly, and almost straight away, people started to realise that we needed to be bringing our own fire support with us. And through 67, 69, everybody's starting to develop this sort of thing. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of different designs that are coming out of the Americans. The Royal Australian Air Force, number 9 Squadron, some engineers and some ground crew there get together. They have a few beers, they get together and they make up some stuff and they go and get some things. They do a few dirty deals with the Americans for cartons of VB and slouch hats and GP boots and all sorts of stuff. They swap things and that, and they get a set of wings, they get some weapon systems, and they start to fiddle around and find what they think works best. And that's the aircraft you see behind you. It's the Australian Bushranger version of the UH-1H. It becomes the most heavily armed Iroquois or Huey helicopter in history. Not the most heavily armed helicopter in general, but the most heavily armed Huey. It's got a minigun at the front, a GE minigun, twin GE miniguns at the front, carrying 10,000 rounds of ammunition and firing up to 6,000 rounds a minute. Was down-rated electrically to fire 4,800 rounds a minute, and then back here in Australia for training and so forth, was downrated again to 2,400. It's just a set of switches in the gun box, in the electrical control box. So it's just switching down, making the motor run slower. It's also, as part of its main armament, it's got 2 pods of 7 tubes, so 14 total, 2.75-inch folding fin aerial rockets, and they could carry up to a 17-pound warhead. And with the 17-pound warheads and 14 of them on the aircraft, it had more net explosive quantity on the aircraft than 3 rounds fired for effect out of an artillery battery. So it had more actual explosive on each aircraft. And then last but not least, it had the twin M60 machine guns as its door protection guns, okay? And if you can see the mannequin behind you there, that steely-eyed young mannequin with the cleft chin, that was me. I did that job for a long time, and it was a lot of fun. It was a great job to do. But both of those guns fire 600 rounds a minute each, and we'd carry about 4,000 rounds for those on the aircraft. So it was very heavily armed and very heavily, it had a lot of ammunition on board for all kinds of reasons, not the least of which most of the hydraulics and all the whiz-bangery that the Americans wanted to use was gutted out by the Australians to carry more ammunition. And the aircraft were fixed, the weapon system were fixed forward firing. They don't shoot off axis at all, they're always fixed forward. Pretty much analogue watch and shoot. So it remained in service as a weapon system up until 2005. So we're continuously using the gunship pattern up until 2005. Now, you could stay on target with a single load with 2 aircraft, a light fire team. You could stay on target for about 40 minutes. With the ammunition you had on board, you could stay on a target. With the heavy fire team, which is 3 aircraft, so 3 aircraft doing the job, one could peel out. You'd leave 2 there still firing. One could peel out, go to a forward rearm refuel base, rearm and refuel, come back, rejoin, then the next one would roll out and go and rearm, refuel. You can stay on target indefinitely. You can stay on target as long as the aircrew can keep flying. You can stay on target as long as they don't as long as they can stay in the aircraft and keep doing the job. So they're a really effective weapon system in close battle. Obviously, they wouldn't survive in a 21st century battlefield, but they survived well enough in the Vietnam conflict and then into the 70s and 80s and right through until post the turn of the century with the Australian Defence Force.
For more of this 2024 Australian Army Flying Museum tour with presenter Scott Downs, follow the link in the description.